The New Testament in the original Greek. The text revised by Brooke, Foss, Westcott, Canon of Peterborough, and Regius, Professor of Divinity, Cambridge, and Fenton, John Anthony Hort, Hulsean, Professor of Divinity, Cambridge, American edition, with an introduction by Philip Scarf, Professor in the Union Theological Seminary, New York, President of the American Bible Revision Committee. Published in 1881 in the Library of Congress, and we found this in the public domain, public access. No copyright infringement was intentional. General contents. Introduction to the American edition by Philip Scaff. Contents of the introduction to the American edition. Introduction to the American edition by Philip Scaff. Merits of the edition. The 17th day of May 1881 marks an epoch in the history of the New Testament. It is the birthday both of the purest English translation and of the purest Greek text of that little book which contains the inspired message of God's wisdom and love to mankind, and which forms the highest standard of Christian faith and duty. The coincidence is remarkable. The original and the translation were matured during the same long period by harmonious though independent cooperation. The editors of the Greek text were members of the English New Testament Company of Revisers. The English and American revisers had the confidential use of advanced proof sheets of this edition of the Greek text as they proceeded, and the translation is perhaps more nearly conformed to it than to any other printed edition from Erasmus and Beza down to Tischendorf and Tregelles. The Textus Receptus, so called, was announced to the world by the Leyden publishers in 1633 with the bold declaration, Textum ergo habes nunc ab omnibus receptum. The author ventures to introduce the Greek Testament, or Philip Scaff ventured to introduce the Greek Testament of Westcott and Hort with the modest assertion, and has there in Latin. It is based exclusively on documentary evidence and on the most careful comparison of all the ancient sources of the text as they have been collected and made available by the indefatigable diligence of former editors, especially of Lachmann, Tischendorf and Tregelles, and embodies the results of the combined labours of more than a quarter of a century. It will of course not supersede the large editions which contain the whole critical apparatus, but it will take its rank at once among the best standard editions of the Greek Testament. Footnote indicator. And it says below, the Saturday Review of London for May 21, 1881, and a notice of the revised version of the New Testament incidentally mentions this Greek edition with the remark, the Clarendon Press volume Archdeacon Palmer's Greek text is beautifully printed. Though this again is eclipsed by the exquisite edition of Dr. Westcott's and Dr. Hort's Greek text, issued by the Pitt Press on the same 17th of May, a day to be much remembered by biblical critics. This last work, formed exclusively on documentary evidence without reference to any printed text, has been long expected by scholars. It is probably the most important contribution to biblical learning in our generation. The revisers, it is understood, had the advantage of consulting it during the progress of their work. So this is ranked at once among the best standard editions of the Greek Testament. Scaff became personally acquainted with the editors and their work 12 years ago. That was probably in 1858 or something like that. 1869, and saw them afterwards repeatedly at Cambridge, London and Peterborough. He formed such a favourable opinion of the value of their labours that he engaged from them and their publisher, Mr. Macmillan, duplicate plates. for an American edition, which is now published by the Messengers, Harper and Brothers. Footnote indication below. The letter of the Messrs. Harper, in which they accepted his proposition, is dated May 17, 1871, on the same day of the same month on which the book was published 10 years afterwards in London. But as Westcott and Hort did not contemplate a critical apparatus below the text, he made subsequently an agreement with his friend Professor Tischendorf for the preparation of an American edition containing his own latest text, with a very brief digest of his critical apparatus, somewhat similar to his Editio Critica Minor, only more condensed and confined to the oldest readings for the use of students, thinking that there would be room for 2 editions, each having its special merits. Tischendorf actually began the work in 1873, and several sheets were set up at Leipzig, when his death in December 1874 ended his earthly labours, preventing him from even preparing the Prolegomena to his 8th critical edition. Scaff knew of no scholars who would better carry out the plan of such an edition than Professor Dr. Ezra Abbott in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Dr. Caspar Rene Gregory in Leipzig. The opinion ripened into conviction by constant use since 1870 of proof sheets of this text in his edition of Lang's Commentary on John. See the critical notes in his exegetical lectures and in his labours as member of the revision committee. Doctors Westcott and Hort were ranked, take note of this, they were ranked in England among the best Greek and biblical scholars of the age. These are those who brought you the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, Westcott and Hort. Doctors Westcott and Hort were ranked in England among the best Greek and biblical scholars of the age. Dr. Hort, educated at Rugby School and Trinity College, Cambridge, and is Hulsean Professor of Divinity in the University of Cambridge since 1878. He is probably more familiar with the textual history of the Greek Testament than any other man living. He exerted great influence in the revision company on all matters of reading. His 2 dissertations on, there's some Greek there, and on the Constantinopolitan Creed, 1876, evince a rare degree of patristic learning and critical acumen. Dr. Westcott, born 1825, educated at Trinity College, Cambridge, is Regius Professor of Divinity at Cambridge since 1870 and Canon of Peterborough since 1869. He was the author of several able and useful works as a history of the English Bible, a history of the canon of the New Testament, an introduction to the study of the Gospels, and a commentary on the Gospel of John, which ranked among the best parts of the Speaker's commentary. These 2 scholars had been in constant correspondence with each other and kept a journal of their discussion of all the important textual questions. Few works have ever been prepared with so much labour, care and devotion as this edition of the Greek Testament began in 1853 and finished in 1881. The introduction and appendix, which the editors promised to publish shortly in a separate volume, would contain full exposition of the principles and results of textual criticism, without anticipating the elaborate treatise which Scaff had not yet seen. He proposed, with their consent to furnish the readers of this volume with such preliminary information as is necessary for an intelligent use of this or any other critical edition of the Greek Testament. Literature. The chief authorities for the topics discussed in this introduction are the following. It has a list of all these people. to the following page, right down to the bottom. And onto the next page. The Prolegomena to Tischendorf's 8th critical edition and the introduction and appendix of Westcott and Hort may be referred to in advance as promising the latest and most accurate information on textual criticism applied to the New Testament. 1. Sources of the text of the New Testament. The original autographs, and it has a footnote indicated there. Autographa, and it has it in Greek. At the bottom here. Of the apostolic writings are lost beyond all reasonable hope of discovery, and are not even mentioned by the post-apostolic authors as being extant anywhere or as having but been seen by them. Another footnote indicator. On the disputed passage of Tertullian, who speaks of ipsae authenticae literae apostolorum, see Scrivener, page 446. They perished probably before the close of the 1st century with the brittle paper then in ordinary use. The Egyptian papyrus, like all other ancient writings, with the exception of a few, were accidentally preserved in Egyptian tombs and mummies, or under the lava of Vesuvius at Herculaneum and Pompeii. God has not chosen to exempt the Bible by a miracle from the fate of other books, but has wisely left room for the diligence and research of man, who is responsible for the use of all the facilities within his reach for the study of the Bible. He has not provided for inspired transcribers any more than inspired printers, nor for infallible translators any more than infallible commentators and readers. He wastes no miracles. He desires free and intelligent worshippers. The letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. The Bible, in its origin and history, is a human as well as a divine book, and must be studied under this twofold aspect. It is the incarnation of God's truth and reflects the divine human person of Christ, to whom it bears witness as the Alpha and Omega, or the Alpha, the Aleph and the Dal. The Alpha and Omega as a way of life, the way, the life and the truth. Even if we had the apostolic autographs, there would be room for verbal criticism, since they, like other ancient books, were written as a continuous whole. I mean, there was no breaks in between them like we have today, and no chapter numbers, etc. Without accents, without punctuation, without division of sentences or words, without titles and subscriptions, without even the name of the author, unless it was part of the text itself. In the absence of the autographs, we must depend upon copies or secondary sources, but these are fortunately far more numerous and trustworthy for the Greek Testament than for any ancient classic. In the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone among ancient prose writings. W&H, Westcott and Hort, page 561. The sources of the text are threefold: manuscript, copies, ancient versions, and patristic quotations. 1. The Greek manuscripts. The manuscripts, or codices, footnote indicator down the bottom, footnote down the bottom, explains about codices, and it reads: codex, or codex, means originally the trunk of a tree, stock, stem, then a block of wood split or sawn into planks, leaves, or tablets, and fastened together. Hence a book, as the ancients wrote on tablets of wood smeared with wax, the leaves being laid upon one another. The Hebrew manuscripts are in rolls. The sources of the text are threefold: manuscript copies, ancient versions, and patristic quotations. The Greek manuscripts. The manuscripts or codices are the direct and most important sources. They number now over 1,700, counting all classes, and new ones may yet be discovered. Footnote indicated there. And look at the bottom. This is what it has to say. The total number of manuscripts recorded by Dr. Scrivener, including lectionaries, is 158 uncials and 1,605 cursives. Page 269, compare PX. But his list is incomplete. He gives an index of about 1,277 separate Greek manuscripts of the New Testament arranged according to the countries where they are now deposited. Paragraph 571 to 584. He assigns 3 to Denmark, 293 to England, 238 to France, 96 to Germany, 6 to Holland, 3 to Ireland, 368 to Italy, 81 to Russia, 8 to Scotland, 23 to Spain, 1 to Sweden, 14 to Switzerland, 104 to Turkey, 39 unknown. See also Edward C. Mitchell, Critical Handbook, Tables 8, 9 and 10. The codices differ in age, extent and value. They were written between the 4th and 16th centuries. The oldest date from the middle of the 4th century and rest of course on still old copies. It's talking about the Greek manuscripts or Greek texts here. Few manuscripts of Greek or Roman classics are older than the 9th or 10th century. The Medicaean MS or manuscript of Virgil is of the 4th century. The Vatican manuscript of Dion Cassius of the 5th. The oldest manuscript of Aeschylus and Sophocles date from the 10th. Those of Euripides from the 12th century. The oldest completely copy of Homer is from the 13th century, though considerable papyrus fragments have been recently discovered which may date from the 5th or 6th. Some manuscripts cover the whole New Testament, some only parts, and hence they are divided into 5 or 6 classes according as they contain the Gospels, or the Acts, or the Catholic epistles, or the Pauline epistles, or the Apocalypse, or only the scripture lessons from the Gospels or Acts and epistles, the lectionaries. Those which cover more than one of these classes or the whole New Testament are numbered in the list 2, 3 or more times. The Gospel manuscripts are the most numerous, those of the Apocalypse the least numerous. Some manuscripts are written with great care, some contain many errors of transcribers. Most of them give the Greek text only, a few the Latin version, also hence called codices bilinguis or Greco-Latini. For example, Codex D or BC for the Gospels and Acts, Codex D Claromonatus for the Pauline epistles, and Cod, some sort of triangle there, Sangalensis for the Gospels. They are written in the East, mostly in Alexandria and Constantinople, for in Europe, with the exception of Greece, Lower Italy and Sicily, the knowledge of the Greek language disappeared after the 5th century till the revival of learning in the 15th, and the Latin Vulgate supplied the place of the Greek and Hebrew Bible. Some words of frequent occurrence are usually abridged, and gives you an example of these in the Greek. The manuscripts are divided into 2 classes, uncial and cursive. The former are written in large or capital letters, litera unciales or majusculae. The latter in small letters, literae minuscula, or in current hand. The uncial manuscripts are older, from the 4th to the 10th century, and hence more valuable, but were discovered and used long after the cursive. 2 of them, the Sinaitic and the Vatican, date from the middle of the 4th century. A. Unsealed manuscripts. The unsealed manuscripts are designated since Wettstein, 1752, for the sake of brevity, by the capital letters of the Latin alphabet A, B, C, D, etc., with the help of Greek letters for a few manuscripts beyond Codex Z, and the Hebrew letter Aleph for the Sinaitic manuscript, which was discovered last and precedes Codex A. Footnote indication there. The present usage arose from the accidental circumstance that the Codex Alexandrinus was designated as Codex A in the lower margin of Walton's polyglot. Scrivener Lock Sit, page 72, second edition. A far better system would be to designate them. In the order of the age or value, which would place B and this alpha in the Greek before A, but the usage in this case can as little be altered as the traditional division into chapters and verses. Mill cited the copies by abridgments of their names, for example, Alex, Kant, Mont, but this mode would now take too much space. Wettstein knew 14 unsealed manuscripts of the Gospels, which he designated from A to 0, and about 112 cursives, besides 24 evangelistaries. See is listed at the close of the Prolegomena, paragraph 220 to 222. The unseals are written on costly and durable vellum or parchment, on quarto or small folio pages of 1 or 2, very rarely of 3 or 4 columns. The older ones have no division of words or sentences, except for paragraphs, no accents or ornaments, and but very few pause marks. Hence it requires some practice to read them with ease. The date and place which were not marked on manuscripts rather than earlier than the 10th century can be only approximately ascertained from the material, the form of letters, the style of writing, the presence or absence of the Ammonian sections. It has it here in the Greek, in the Latin capitula, in the Gospels, the Eusebian canons or tablets of references to the Ammonian sections after 340 when Eusebius died, the Euthalian sections in the Acts and Epistles, and the stichometric divisions or lines. It's in the Greek here, corresponding to sentences both introduced by Euthalius, circulation AD 458, and footnote indicated there. Afterwards, these stichometric divisions were abandoned as too costly and gave way to dots or other marks between the sentences. This was the beginning of punctuation. Okay, both introduced by Euthalius, circulation AD 458, marks of punctuation 9th century, etc. Sometimes a second or third hand was introduced. Second or third hand has introduced punctuation and accents or different readings. Hence the distinction of lections, etc., etc., marked by a asterisk, etc., etc. In some manuscripts, as Codex C, P, Q, R, Z, and the symbol here, have been written twice over owing to the scarcity and costliness of parchment, and are called codices prescripti or palimpsests. It's in the Greek there. The new book being written between the lines or across or in place of the old Bible text. So it's like, say if you had this text here, what they've done, looks like they've rubbed it out and written over it. Constantine the Great ordered from Eusebius for the churches of Constantinople the preparation of 50 manuscripts of the Bible to be written on artificially wrought skins by skillful calligraphers. There's a footnote indicated here. It says down the bottom, Eusebius Vita Constantinople 436. It has it in Greek, and it has something here, Scrivener Introduction, page 72, second edition, 1874. So yeah, these are especially skillful calligraphists or scribes or writers, right? Copyists. To judge from this fact, the number of uncials was once very large, but most of them perished in the Middle Ages. The whole number now known as less than 100. Scrivener reckons 56 for the Gospels, most of them only fragments, 14 for the Acts and so forth. It's right down the bottom here, all this information. Okay, here's Dr. Abbott's list as follows. Continues. Whole number of distinct manuscripts. The Sinaitic and the Vatican manuscripts are by far the most important for antiquity, completeness and value. Scaff gives a brief description of the best uncial manuscripts, which are most frequently quoted by critics. 1. Uncials of the first class. They are 4, 2 from the 4th, 2 from the 5th century, 1 complete, 2 nearly complete, A and B, and so forth. And it continues. And here's a really long footnote. Professor C. Tischendorf in the convent of St. Catherine at the foot of Mount Sinai on the 4th of February 1859. It's probably when a manuscript was found. Maybe this Codex Sinaiticus. It was published at St. Petersburg, printed at Leipzig at the expense of the Tsar Alexander II in celebration of the first millennium of the Russian Empire in accurate imitation by type. And it's got this long story here. The story of this discovery, which made Tischendorf one of the happiest men Philip Scaff even known, reads like an heroic romance. His 3 journeys from Leipzig to Mount Sinai in pursuit of manuscript treasures in 1844, 1853, and 1859. His first rescue of 43 leaves of the Septuagint from a wastebasket in the convent of St. Catherine in 1844. His final discovery of the whole Codex Sinaiticus in 1859, with the powerful aid of the recommendation of that noble Tsar who met such a terrible death at the hands of the Nihilists in 1881. His patient labour in transcribing it at Cairo and in its publication at Leipzig in connection with a great national event of the Russian Empire. His controversy with the Greek Simonides, who impudently claimed to have written the Codex on Mount Athos in 1839 and 1840, are all told by himself, not without some excusable vanity, in his Reise in den Orient, 1845-46, and Aus dem Heilande, 1862, and so forth, and went on a visit to Mount Sinai in March 1877. Scaff maybe saw a copy of the magnificent 4-volume edition in the convent library and mentioned the name of Tischendorf. The sub-prior kindled up in indignation and called him a thief who had stolen the greatest treasure on the pretext of a temporary loan. And when he reminded him of the large reward of the Emperor of Russia, who had furnished a new silver shrine for the coffin of St. Catherine, he admitted it reluctantly, but remarked that they did not want the silver but the manuscript which these monks could read and were at one time ready to throw into the fire. After long delays, the manuscript was formally presented to the Tsar in 1869 by the new prior, Archbishop Kallistratos, and the monks of the convents of St. Catherine and Cairo. See Tischendorf, the Sinai Bible, 1871. It'll be like the Sinai Bible, page 91.